December 16th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. Denali National Park, Alaska.
The cabin looked smaller than Claire remembered. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath fogging in the -15-degree air, staring at the structure that had defined so many childhood summers. The logs were darker now, weathered by 2 decades of Alaskan winters. Snow buried the porch steps. The windows were dark and empty, like eyes that had stopped seeing. Her father had been dead for 3 weeks. Claire's hands tightened around the truck keys. She'd driven 11 hours from Anchorage, stopped twice to clear ice from the windshield, and argued with herself the entire way about whether this trip was necessary. The lawyer had been clear. The cabin needed to be cleared out within 60 days, or the state would claim it. Personal effects removed, utilities disconnected, the property prepared for sale. She told herself it would be simple. A weekend job. Pack up Dad's things, lock the door, drive back to her apartment and her job and her normal life, where she didn't think about the man who'd chosen this isolated wilderness over his own daughter. But standing here now, looking at the place where Robert Morrison had spent the last 15 years of his life, Claire felt something crack in her chest. "Just get it done," she muttered, forcing her legs to move. The porch groaned under her boots. The door key hung on the same rusty nail it always had, hidden under the loose board, third from the left. Some things never changed. Claire's fingers fumbled with the lock, numb despite her gloves. The door swung open with a sound like a sigh. Inside, the cabin was exactly as she remembered and completely foreign at the same time. The main room was small, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. A stone fireplace dominated the north wall. Her father's reading chair sat beside it, the leather cracked and faded. Bookshelves lined every available surface, packed with field guides, journals and paperbacks with broken spines. The kitchenette occupied one corner, the wood stove another. A ladder led to the loft where she'd slept as a child, looking up at stars through the skylight. But there were new things too. Photographs she didn't recognize covered the walls. Her father in his ranger uniform, decades younger, standing beside people Claire had never met. Charts and maps marked with notes in his familiar handwriting. And in the center of the small table, a leather journal, closed but waiting. Before incredible stories pull you in, hit subscribe for Arctic Wolf Legends. You won't regret it. Claire set her bag down and moved toward the fireplace. Her father's reading glasses sat on the arm of his chair, folded carefully, as if he'd just set them down and would return any moment. She picked them up, and her vision blurred. Robert Morrison had been 68 when the heart attack took him. The ranger station found him 2 days later when he missed his weekly radio check-in. He died alone in this cabin, surrounded by the wilderness he'd loved more than he'd loved his family. At least, that's what Claire had told herself for 15 years. The afternoon light was already fading. Alaska in December meant 4 hours of daylight if you were lucky. Claire forced herself to focus. She planned to spend tonight organizing, start packing tomorrow, finish by the weekend. Simple, efficient, no emotions required. She built a fire using the wood stacked beside the hearth, her hands remembering the motions her father had taught her when she was 8. Kindling first, then small logs, leave room for air to flow. The flames caught quickly, crackling and popping, filling the room with warmth and the scent of burning pine. By 6 p.m., full darkness had fallen. The temperature outside had dropped to -22. Claire made coffee on the wood stove and forced herself to eat a protein bar, though she wasn't hungry. The silence pressed against her ears. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, no hum of electricity, just the fire and the wind and the vast empty wilderness stretching for miles in every direction. She picked up her father's journal. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed. Her father's handwriting filled every line, neat and precise. The entries weren't dated in order. They jumped around, years mixed together, as if he'd used the journal more for important moments than daily records. Claire flipped to a random page. July 12, 2019. Frost showed up today after 3 weeks gone. I was starting to worry. He's getting old, nearly 17 now. That's ancient for his kind. His muzzle is completely white now, not just his body. He moves slower, sleeps more. I catch him watching me sometimes with those amber eyes, like he knows something I don't. I wonder if he'll outlive me. I hope not. I don't want him to be alone when I'm gone. Claire's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. Frost. Her father had never mentioned anyone named Frost in the few phone calls they'd shared over the years. She flipped backward, looking for context. September 3, 2018. Frost brought down a caribou today, clean kill. He left half of it at my door. I keep telling him I don't need him to feed me, but he doesn't listen, or he doesn't care. Hard to tell with him. We ate dinner together on the porch, him with his share, me with mine. Strange how comfortable it's become, sharing space with him. Most people would think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Claire's pulse quickened. The entries were about an animal. Had her father kept a dog she didn't know about? She turned more pages, reading faster now. March 15, 2017. Blizzard lasted 4 days. Frost stayed the entire time, sleeping by the fire. When the winds screamed loud enough to shake the walls, he'd lift his head and listen, but he never tried to leave. We're both too old for that kind of storm now, both content to wait it out together. I thought about Claire today, wondered if she's okay, if she's happy, if she ever thinks about this place. I doubt it. I ruined that when I chose to stay here instead of coming back to Anchorage after her mother died. Some choices you can't take back. Claire's throat tightened. She slammed the journal shut and stood, pacing to the window. Snow had started falling, thick flakes that absorbed all sound. The forest was a wall of darkness beyond the glass. Her father had thought about her, had regretted his choices, and she'd spent 15 years being angry at him for abandoning her after Mom died, for choosing this isolated cabin over his 16-year-old daughter who'd just lost her mother and needed her father. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, trying to steady her breathing. That's when she heard it. A sound at the door. Soft, deliberate. Not wind, not branches. Something scraping wood. Claire froze. Her father's hunting rifle hung above the fireplace, but she'd never learned to use it. The scraping came again, lower this time, like something trying to dig underneath. Her heart hammered. Bears. It had to be a bear. But bears hibernated in December, didn't they? The scraping stopped. Silence stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. Then came a sound that raised every hair on Claire's arms. A low, mournful howl that seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. Claire's hand found her phone in her pocket, but there was no signal. There was never signal out here. She was 40 miles from the nearest neighbor, in the middle of a snowstorm, with something outside her door that was definitely not human. The howl came again, closer, sadder. Claire's rational mind said, "Stay inside. Wait until morning. Whatever it is, we'll leave." But something else, something that sounded uncomfortably like her father's voice in her memory, said, "Open the door." She moved toward the entrance before she could think better of it. Her hand closed around the cold metal of the doorknob. She took a breath that felt like swallowing ice. Then she opened the door. For 3 seconds, Claire didn't understand what she was seeing. The animal was massive, easily 140 pounds of muscle and bone. Its fur was pure white, so white it seemed to glow against the darkness. Snow collected on its back, melting slowly from body heat. Its eyes were amber, luminous, filled with something that looked terrifyingly close to intelligence. A wolf. A white wolf stood on her father's porch, looking at her like it had been waiting for her to arrive. Claire's breath stopped. Every survival instinct screamed at her to slam the door, to run, to do anything except stand there, meeting the gaze of a predator that could kill her in seconds. But the wolf didn't move, didn't bare its teeth, didn't crouch to attack. Instead, it took one slow step forward, then another. Its eyes never left hers. Claire's body unfroze. She stumbled backward, giving the animal space, still not closing the door because somehow, impossibly, closing the door felt wrong. The wolf stepped across the threshold into the cabin. It moved with a limp, favoring its left front leg. Its breathing was labored, visible in the warm air, and as it passed her, Claire caught the scent of wild things and pine and something else, something old and tired and sad. The wolf walked directly to the fireplace. It looked up at the photographs on the mantel, at one in particular. Robert Morrison at 50, standing in this very clearing, smiling at the camera. Then the wolf lay down on the rug in front of the fire, rested its massive head on its paws, and closed its eyes. Claire stood frozen by the door, her mind trying and failing to process what had just happened. This was Frost. It had to be. The wolf her father had written about. The companion he'd kept for years. And somehow, impossibly, the animal had known to come here, had known Robert was gone, had known Claire would arrive. The wolf's breathing steadied into the rhythm of sleep. Its white fur rose and fell with each breath. In the firelight, it looked ancient and exhausted, like a creature who traveled too far for too long. Claire's hands shook as she closed the door. She locked it, though she wasn't sure why. The danger was already inside. But as she looked at the wolf sleeping by her father's fire, she realized it didn't feel like danger. It felt like something else entirely. It felt like grief. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat in her father's reading chair, wrapped in a quilt she remembered from childhood, watching the white wolf breathe. Every time it shifted position, her heart rate spiked. Every time it made a sound, she tensed. But the animal never woke, never threatened, never did anything except sleep with the exhaustion of something pushed past its limits. Around 3 a.m., Claire gave up on resting and returned to her father's journal. She read chronologically this time, starting from the first entry. April 8, 2004. I found him today. I was checking the northern fence line when I heard the sounds. High-pitched, desperate. It took me 20 minutes to locate the source. A wolf pup, maybe 3 weeks old, trapped in a drainage culvert. White as fresh snow, which explained why his pack had abandoned him. Genetic abnormality. They do that sometimes, leave behind the ones who won't survive. He was hypothermic, half-starved, covered in his own waste. I should have left him. It's not my job to interfere with nature. But I picked him up anyway. He fit in my hands. He didn't fight, just looked at me with these amber eyes like he knew I was his last chance. I brought him home, fed him with an eyedropper, kept him warm against my chest for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, he licked my hand. I named him Frost. Claire's vision blurred. She blinked hard and kept reading. May 1, 2004. Frost is getting stronger. Started eating solid food. He follows me everywhere, crying if I go outside without him. The rational part of my brain knows I need to release him back to the wild. The rest of me doesn't want to let go. It's been 3 years since Sarah died. 3 years since Claire stopped taking my calls. I came out here to be alone, to punish myself maybe, to disappear into work that mattered more than I did. But this pup needs me, and I forgot what that felt like, being needed. The entries continued, documenting Frost's growth from pup to juvenile to full-grown wolf. Robert wrote about teaching him to hunt, about their first winter together, about the day Frost disappeared for 2 weeks and came back with a wild pack scent on his fur, about the choice Frost made to return. November 12, 2005, Frost left the wild pack. I watched him walk away from them and come back to the cabin. He could have gone, could have lived the life he was meant to live, but he chose this instead. Chose me. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve his loyalty, but I'm grateful for it anyway. Sometimes I think about calling Claire, telling her about Frost, apologizing for being too broken to be her father after Sarah died. But what would I say? That I replaced her with a wolf? That I can handle animal companionship but failed at human connection? She's better off without me. Claire closed the journal, her face wet. She'd spent 15 years angry at her father for abandoning her. She'd never considered that he might have been protecting her from his own damage, his own inability to function after losing the love of his life. The wolf, Frost, stirred in his sleep. A small whimper escaped him, the sound of something in pain. Claire stood and moved closer, careful not to startle him. In the firelight, she could see more details. His muzzle was greying, his body thinner than it should be. The limp she'd noticed earlier came from a swollen left paw, and when she knelt beside him, she could hear the rattle in his breathing. He was sick, old and sick, and possibly dying. "Hey," she whispered. "Frost?" The wolf's eyes opened slowly. They focused on her with difficulty, clouded with fever. But there was recognition there. He knew who she was, had known from the moment she opened the door. Her father must have shown him pictures, must have talked about her. The thought made her chest ache. "I'm Claire," she said softly. "Robert's daughter." Frost's tail moved, just once, a weak thump against the floor. Then his eyes closed again, and his breathing grew labored. Claire's medical training, rusty from years working in hospital administration instead of actual nursing, kicked in. She'd seen animals in distress before, during her brief stint at a veterinary clinic in college. Frost's symptoms pointed to pneumonia, possibly combined with infection from the swollen paw. Out here, 40 miles from help, with a blizzard intensifying outside, there was no veterinarian coming, no rescue, no easy solution. It was just her and her father's last friend, and she had no idea how to save him. The wind howled against the cabin walls, and snow piled higher against the windows. Claire looked at the wolf who'd chosen her father, who'd stayed loyal for 20 years, who'd come here to die in the place he called home. "Not yet," she whispered. "You don't get to die yet." She didn't know if she was talking to Frost or to the ghost of her father. Maybe both. Claire stood and moved to her father's supply cabinet. Robert Morrison had been a ranger for 40 years. He'd know how to handle wilderness medicine. His supplies had to still be here. She found what she needed in a metal box labeled "Emergency." Antibiotics meant for humans, but safe for canines in adjusted doses, antiseptic, bandages, and a veterinary manual that looked like it had been well used. Her hands didn't shake as she prepared the first dose. She'd made her decision. If her father's last friend was going to die in this cabin, it wouldn't be without a fight. "Okay, Frost," she said, kneeling beside the sleeping wolf. "This is going to hurt. I'm sorry, but Dad would want me to try." The wolf's eyes opened as she touched his swollen paw. For a moment, Claire thought he might snap at her. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that could crush bone. But then he relaxed, as if he understood, as if he trusted her the way he'd trusted Robert. Claire cleaned the infected wound, administered the antibiotic, and wrapped his paw with steady hands. Frost whimpered, but didn't pull away. When she finished, he licked her hand once, then rested his head back on his paws. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, a woman and a wolf sat by a dying fire, both grieving the same man, both trying to survive the storm. The blizzard lasted 3 days. Claire had lived in Alaska her entire life, but she'd forgotten the particular cruelty of a Denali storm. The wind didn't just blow, it screamed. Snow didn't fall, it attacked horizontally, turning the world into a white void where up and down lost meaning. The cabin shook with each gust, and ice formed on the inside of the windows in crystalline patterns. She was trapped, completely, utterly trapped. Her truck was buried under 4 feet of snow. The road, such as it was, had disappeared. Cell service remained non-existent. The satellite phone her father had kept charged was dead, its battery corroded from years of disuse. It was just her, a sick wolf, and her father's journals. On the first morning, Claire woke in the reading chair to find Frost watching her. His amber eyes were clearer than they'd been the night before, and the rattling in his breathing had eased slightly. The antibiotics were working. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. Frost's tail thumped once against the floor. Then he struggled to his feet, limping heavily toward the door. Claire's heart sank. He wanted to leave. Of course he did. He was wild, not domesticated. She'd been foolish to think he'd stay just because her father had loved him. She opened the door. Wind and snow blasted into the cabin with physical force. Frost stepped onto the porch, looked out at the storm, then turned and came back inside. He looked at Claire, then at the fireplace, then back at her. "You need to go out," she realized. "But not to leave, to use the bathroom." Frost sat down and waited with remarkable patience while Claire pulled on her father's parka, boots, and gloves. The coat smelled like him, pine and old spice and wood smoke. It made her eyes burn. Together, they ventured into the storm. Frost hobbled to the tree line, did his business with admirable efficiency, then hurried back to the cabin as fast as his injured paw allowed. Claire followed, half blind from the snow, using the rope she'd tied from the porch to a nearby tree to guide her way back. Inside, they both shook off snow and returned to the fire. Frost collapsed on the rug with a groan that sounded entirely too human. Claire hung their wet gear and added more wood to the flames. "So," she said to the wolf, "I guess we're roommates now." Frost's ear flicked in her direction, which she chose to interpret as agreement. The days developed a rhythm. Claire woke early, tended the fire, checked Frost's wound, administered his medication. She made breakfast for herself and opened a can of her father's emergency rations for Frost. The wolf ate slowly, carefully, clearly still recovering his strength. Then she read. Her father's journals became her obsession. There were 7 of them in total, spanning 20 years. Robert Morrison had been a meticulous documenter of his life with Frost. Every hunt, every injury, every moment of connection or confusion was recorded in neat handwriting that grew shakier in recent years. July 23, 2008. Frost caught his first elk today without my help. I watched from a distance as he stalked, waited, chose his moment perfectly. The kill was clean. He looked back at me afterward, and I swear he was proud. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing, but I don't think so. We've been together 4 years now. I can read him better than I could read most humans. He's not a pet, not really. He comes and goes as he pleases. Sometimes he disappears for weeks and I think this is it. He's gone back to the wild for good. Then he shows up on the porch with a rabbit for me, like it's the most natural thing in the world. I wonder what Sarah would think of this. She always said I was better with animals than people. Guess she was right. Claire paused at that entry. Her mother's name, written so casually, made her chest tight. Sarah Morrison had died of ovarian cancer when Claire was 16. The disease took her in 8 months, fast and cruel. Her father had shut down completely afterward, barely speaking, barely functioning. Within a year, he'd requested a transfer to this remote station and never came back to Anchorage. Claire had been furious. She'd needed her father, and he'd abandoned her to live alone in the woods, like some kind of hermit. She'd gone to live with her Aunt Martha, finished high school, put herself through nursing school, and built a life that had no room for a father who'd chosen isolation over his own daughter. But reading these journals, seeing the raw pain in her father's words, Claire began to understand. He hadn't left because he didn't love her. He'd left because he was broken, and he didn't know how to be around people without Sarah to smooth his rough edges. December 19, 2010. Claire turned 23 today. I thought about calling her, even picked up the phone twice. But what would I say? Happy birthday? Sorry I've been a terrible father. Hope you're doing well without me? She doesn't need my damage in her life. She deserves better than a father who can barely hold a conversation without Sarah there to translate me to the world. Frost sat with me all evening. He doesn't ask questions, doesn't expect explanations, just offers his presence, warm and solid and real. Sometimes that's enough. Claire closed the journal and looked at Frost, who was watching her from the rug. The wolf's eyes held a depth of understanding that shouldn't be possible in an animal. "He loved you very much," she said softly. "Didn't he?" Frost's tail moved in a slow, deliberate wag. "And you loved him back," The wolf stood, limped over to where Claire sat, and rested his massive head on her knee. The weight was substantial, the gesture unmistakable. Claire's hand moved to stroke Frost's fur, almost without her conscious decision. It was softer than she expected, thick and warm. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, the rise and fall of his breathing. "I'm sorry I wasn't here," she whispered. "I'm sorry he died alone." Frost's eyes closed. He leaned more heavily against her leg, accepting the comfort and offering his own. They sat like that for a long time, woman and wolf, both mourning the man who'd connected them. On the second day, Claire found a box under her father's bed labelled "Claire, in case." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, dated over the past 15 years, all addressed to her. None had been sent. She picked up the first one, dated 2 months after he'd moved to the cabin. "Dear Claire, I'm writing this even though I'll never send it. Maybe that makes me a coward. Probably does. I left because I couldn't breathe in that house without your mother. Every room reminded me of her. Every sound I expected to be her footsteps. I was drowning, and I didn't want to pull you down with me. You're 16. You deserve a normal life. Friends, school, a future that doesn't include a father who barely functions. Martha will take better care of you than I ever could. I think about you every day, wonder if you're okay, if you hate me. You probably should. I'm sorry. Dad." Claire's vision blurred. She grabbed another letter, this one from 5 years later. "Dear Claire, I heard from Martha that you graduated nursing school, top of your class. I'm proud of you. I wish I could tell you that in person, but I lost that right a long time ago. Life here is simple, quiet. I have a companion now, a wolf I rescued as a pup. His name is Frost. He's better company than I deserve. He doesn't ask me to be anything I'm not. Sometimes I imagine you visiting, showing you this place, introducing you to Frost. But I know you won't. Why would you? I'm just the father who abandoned you when you needed me most. I love you. I always have. I just never knew how to show it. Dad." Claire read letter after letter, her father's words painting a picture of a man consumed by guilt and grief, who'd convinced himself his daughter was better off without him, who'd poured all his capacity for love into a wolf because he couldn't trust himself not to fail at human connection again. The last letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. "Dear Claire, I'm getting old. 70 feels ancient out here. Frost is old too, nearly 20. We're both slowing down. I need to tell you something. When I die, someone needs to check on Frost. I know that's a ridiculous request. He's a wild animal. He can take care of himself. But he's more than that. He's family. The only family I've allowed myself to have since I left you. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. The cabin is yours if you want it. Everything in it is yours. But more than that, please, if Frost is still alive, help him. He gave me 20 years of companionship when I deserved none. He stayed when he could have left. He chose me every single day. I couldn't be there for you, Claire. That's my greatest failure. But maybe you could be there for him, for both of us. I love you. I'm sorry. And I hope, somehow, you can forgive me. Dad." The letter fell from Claire's hands. She sat on the floor of her father's cabin, surrounded by years of unsent apologies, and cried until she had nothing left. Frost appeared beside her without sound. He pressed his body against hers, offering his weight, his warmth, his presence. When she wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed into his fur, he didn't pull away. He just held still, solid as stone, letting her grieve. "I forgive him," she whispered into the wolf's fur. "I forgive him." Frost's tail moved slowly against the floor. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, a broken connection began to mend, even though one half of it was already gone. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The wind had finally died down, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and Frost's steady breathing. She found herself watching the wolf, studying him with the attention her father must have given him thousands of times. Frost was magnificent, even old and injured. His build was powerful, designed for endurance. His white coat, rare among grey wolves, marked him as something special. But it was his eyes that held her. They weren't just intelligent, they were knowing, as if Frost understood things that should be beyond animal comprehension. At 2 a.m., Frost woke suddenly. His head lifted, ears pricked forward, attention focused on the door. Claire tensed. "What is it?" The wolf stood, limping to the window. He stared out into the darkness, a low rumble building in his chest. Claire moved beside him, looking out. The storm had cleared enough to see shapes in the moonlight. The forest was silver and black, shadows and snow. Then she saw them. 4 wolves stood at the edge of the clearing, grey and brown, smaller than Frost but clearly healthy and strong. They watched the cabin with eyes that reflected the moonlight like coins. "Your pack?" Claire whispered. Frost's growl deepened. But he didn't sound aggressive. He sounded protective. One of the wolves, the largest, took a step forward. It was a challenge or an invitation. Claire couldn't tell which. Frost turned away from the window. He looked at Claire, then at the door, then back at her. The message was clear. He could leave. He could go with his pack, return to the wild, live out his final days as a wolf should. But he was asking her permission. Claire's throat closed. Her father had given Frost this same choice 20 years ago. Let him go, or ask him to stay. Robert had chosen to let Frost decide for himself. "It's your choice," Claire said, forcing the words out. "If you want to go, I understand. You don't owe me anything." Frost stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the window, and Claire's heart broke a little, already grieving the loss of this connection. The white wolf threw back his head and howled. The sound filled the cabin, impossibly loud, ancient and wild and beautiful. It spoke of pack bonds and territorial claims and something else, something that sounded like goodbye. The 4 wolves in the clearing answered. Their voices joined Frost's, creating a chorus that raised the hair on Claire's arms. Then, one by one, the wild wolves turned and melted back into the forest. Frost stopped howling. He limped back to the fire, lay down on the rug, and closed his eyes. He'd made his choice. Again. For the second time in his life, Frost had chosen human companionship over wild freedom. He'd chosen Claire. She stood frozen by the window, watching the empty clearing, trying to process what had just happened. Her father's wolf had just turned down his own pack to stay with her. A woman he'd known for 3 days. A woman who wasn't Robert Morrison. "Why?" she asked the sleeping wolf. "Why would you choose this?" Frost's only answer was the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Claire returned to her father's journal, seeking understanding. She found it in an entry from 12 years ago. February 14, 2013. Frost had a choice today. His old pack came calling. I heard them howling in the distance, could see them on the ridge. Frost heard them too. He stood on the porch for an hour, just listening, and I thought, this is it. He's leaving. He's finally going home. But he didn't. He came back inside, curled up by the fire, and went to sleep. Like the decision was that simple. I asked him why later, even though I knew he couldn't answer. He just looked at me with those amber eyes, and I understood. We choose who we love. We choose where we belong. It's not always about blood or species or what makes sense to anyone else. Frost chose me, not because he had to, not because he couldn't survive without me, but because love, real love, is always a choice. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful anyway. Claire closed the journal and looked at Frost, peaceful in his sleep despite his pain, despite his age, despite having every reason to return to the wild where he belonged. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing him and for choosing me." On the morning of the third day, Claire woke to silence. The storm had passed. Sunlight, thin and watery but real, filtered through the windows. The world outside was buried under 6 feet of snow, but the air was still, and the sky was the kind of blue that only existed in Alaska after a blizzard. Frost was already awake, sitting by the door, looking at her expectantly. "You want to go out?" she said. It wasn't a question. She dressed in layers, prepared for the cold, and opened the door. The snow had drifted against the cabin walls, creating shapes like frozen waves. The clearing was unrecognizable, transformed into a landscape of white on white. Frost bounded outside with more energy than he'd shown in days. The antibiotics had worked. His breathing was clear, his movements stronger. He still favored his injured paw, but the limp was less pronounced. He plunged into the snow, rolling in it like a puppy, biting at crystals that sparkled in the sunlight. His joy was infectious and impossible to ignore. Claire found herself laughing, actually laughing. The sound felt foreign after weeks of grief. "You're ridiculous," she called to him. "You're 20 years old. Act your age." Frost responded by kicking up a spray of snow in her direction. For the next hour, they played. Claire threw snowballs that Frost caught or dodged. Frost bounded around her in circles, kicking up powder, clearly delighting in her reactions. It was absurd. It was wonderful. It was exactly what she needed. When they finally went back inside, both exhausted and half frozen, Claire felt something shift in her chest. The grief was still there. The guilt and anger and confusion about her father was still there. But now, there was something else too. Hope. She made hot chocolate for herself and warmed up food for Frost. They ate together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. "I have to call work," Claire said eventually. "Figure out how long I can stay." Frost's ear flicked toward her, listening. "I was supposed to be back on Monday. That's obviously not happening. And honestly," she paused, surprised by what she was about to say, "I don't think I want to go back. Not yet. Maybe not at all." The cabin needed work. Her father's affairs needed settling, and Frost needed her. More than that, she needed him, needed this place, needed time to process everything she'd learned about her father, about herself, about the 15 years she'd spent angry when she could have spent them understanding. "What do you think?" she asked the wolf. "Should I stay?" Frost stood, walked over to where she sat, and placed his head in her lap. His amber eyes looked up at her with complete trust. Claire's hand moved to scratch behind his ears. "Okay then, I'll stay." As if he'd been waiting for that decision, Frost's tail wagged. Once. Twice. Then he settled at her feet with a contented sigh that sounded entirely too much like satisfaction. Outside, the Alaskan wilderness stretched endless and white. Inside, a woman and a wolf sat by the fire, two creatures who'd found each other in grief and chosen, against all logic, to hold on. The hard part was just beginning, but for the first time in 3 weeks, Claire felt ready to face it. The satellite phone came back to life on the 4th day. Claire had been cleaning the solar panels on the roof, a task her father's journals said he'd done weekly, when she noticed the charging indicator blinking green. Inside, she wiped the corrosion from the battery contacts, said a prayer to whatever gods protected old technology, and pressed the power button. The phone buzzed to life. 3 bars of signal, 17 missed calls, all from the same number, Denali Ranger Station. Claire stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the callback button. Once she made this call, the outside world would come rushing back in. Questions would be asked. Decisions would need to be made. Her father's death would become official business instead of private grief. Frost watched her from the rug, head tilted slightly, as if asking what she was waiting for. "Okay," she muttered. "Here goes." The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Denali Station, Ranger Mackenzie speaking." "Hi, this is Claire Morrison, Robert Morrison's daughter. I'm calling from—" "Jesus Christ, you're alive." Mackenzie's relief was palpable. "We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. When the storm hit and we couldn't raise anyone at the cabin, we thought, Well, we thought the worst. I'm fine. The storm knocked out the solar panels. I just got the phone working again. You've been alone out there this whole time? In that blizzard? Mackenzie's tone shifted from relief to concern. Miss Morrison, that cabin's 40 miles from the nearest road. If something had happened... I wasn't alone, Claire interrupted, then immediately regretted it. Silence. Then, there's someone else with you? Claire looked at Frost, who was now sitting up, ears pricked forward, listening to her side of the conversation with unnerving focus. Sort of, she said carefully. It's complicated. Miss Morrison, I'm going to need you to explain what sort of means. Claire took a breath. No point hiding it now. My father had a wolf, a white wolf named Frost. He's been living here with Dad for 20 years. When I arrived, Frost was waiting. He's sick. I've been treating him. The silence on the other end stretched so long, Claire thought the connection had dropped. Ranger Mackenzie? I'm here. His voice had gone flat. Miss Morrison, are you telling me you've been alone in that cabin with a wild wolf for 3 days? He's not dangerous. He was my father's companion. A wolf is a wild animal, Miss Morrison. I don't care how tame your father thought he was. Wolves are unpredictable, especially when injured or sick. You need to leave that cabin immediately. Frost's ears went back. He stood, moving closer to Claire, positioning himself between her and the phone, as if he could somehow protect her from the conversation. I'm not leaving him, Claire said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. Then we're coming to get you. I'll have a team there by... No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Ranger Mackenzie, with all due respect, I'm an adult. I'm in no danger, and I'm not leaving until I've settled my father's affairs. Your father, Mackenzie stopped himself. When he spoke again, his tone was softer. Look, Robert was a good man, one of the best rangers I've ever worked with. But he kept that wolf secret for a reason. If Fish and Wildlife finds out there's a habituated wolf living on federal land, they'll relocate it. Or worse. Claire's stomach dropped. Worse? Habituated wolves are considered a public safety risk, especially aggressive ones. The protocol is tranquilize and relocate if possible, destroy if necessary. The word destroy hit Claire like a physical blow. She looked at Frost, who was watching her with those knowing amber eyes, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. He's not aggressive, she said quietly. He's old, he's sick, and he's grieving, just like me. Mackenzie sighed. Miss Morrison, Claire, I understand you're going through a difficult time, but keeping a wild wolf is illegal. It's dangerous, and when someone inevitably finds out, and they will, it's going to end badly for everyone, especially the animal. Claire's mind raced. Mackenzie was right. She couldn't keep Frost here indefinitely. Eventually someone would come checking. A ranger, a surveyor, someone. And when they did, Frost's life would be in danger. But the thought of letting them take him, of watching him be tranquilized and shipped off to some distant wilderness where he'd die alone and confused, was unbearable. How long do I have, she asked, before someone comes out here? The roads won't be passable for at least a week, probably longer. We've got equipment down, emergency calls taking priority. But Claire, a week isn't going to change. A week is enough time to figure something out. There's nothing to figure out. The law is clear. Then I'll break the law. The words surprised her as much as they probably surprised Mackenzie. Claire Morrison, hospital administrator, rule follower, person who'd never gotten so much as a speeding ticket, had just declared her intention to break federal wildlife protection laws. Don't do anything stupid, Mackenzie warned. Your father wouldn't want. My father spent 20 years protecting Frost, Claire interrupted. He kept him secret, kept him safe, gave him a life worth living. I'm not going to undo that just because it's inconvenient or illegal. She could hear Mackenzie's frustration in his breathing. You're as stubborn as Robert was." "Thank you." Despite himself, Mackenzie laughed. That wasn't a compliment. He paused. "Look, I'll give you the week. But after that, I have to file a report. I have to follow protocol. You understand?" "I understand." Claire didn't add that she had no intention of being here when that report was filed. "Thank you, Ranger Mackenzie." "Don't thank me. And Claire, be careful. That wolf might have been loyal to your father, but you're not Robert. Don't assume it'll extend that loyalty to you." The call ended. Claire set the phone down and found Frost staring at her. "We have a problem," she told him. Frost's tail moved once, slowly, as if to say, "I know." The rest of the day, Claire spent sorting through her father's paperwork. There had to be something, some documentation that explained how Robert had managed to keep Frost hidden for 2 decades. What she found was both simpler and more complex than she expected. Her father had never officially registered Frost, had never taken him to a vet, never filed any paperwork, never left any trace that the wolf existed. As far as the government was concerned, Robert Morrison had lived alone in this cabin for 20 years. But he'd been meticulous about covering his tracks. Claire found a ledger documenting every time a ranger or surveyor had scheduled a visit. Without exception, those dates corresponded with journal entries describing Frost disappearing into the wilderness for days at a time. June 3, 2015. Jenkins is coming tomorrow for the annual property inspection. Frost left this morning, like he knew. I think he can smell other humans coming. Or maybe he reads my tension. Either way, he'll be gone 3 days, back the day after Jenkins leaves, like clockwork. Sometimes I wonder if he understands more than I give him credit for. He certainly understands enough to keep himself hidden when it matters. Her father had been protecting Frost the only way he knew how, by keeping him invisible. But that strategy wouldn't work for Claire. She was an unknown factor. People would come checking on her, asking questions, wanting to make sure Robert Morrison's daughter wasn't living alone in dangerous isolation. Every visit would put Frost at risk. She needed a different plan. That night, Claire sat at her father's desk, surrounded by maps and journals and legal documents she barely understood, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Frost lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on her, then settling back down with a sigh. "I don't know what to do," she admitted to him. "Dad spent 20 years figuring out how to keep you safe. I've got a week." Frost stood and moved to the window. He stared out at the moonlit forest, his body tense, alert. "What is it?" Claire joined him. At first she saw nothing. Then movement at the tree line. 4 shapes, grey and brown against the snow. The same wolves from 2 nights ago. "Your pack came back," she whispered. Frost's ears flicked forward. His tail hung low, uncertain. The largest wolf, the alpha, stepped into the clearing. It sat down in the snow, waiting. "They want you to come with them," Claire said. Her chest ached with the realization. That's the answer, isn't it? You go with them, back to the wild, where you're safe from rangers and laws and people like me who don't know how to protect you. Frost looked up at her. His amber eyes held something that looked uncomfortably close to sadness. "I know," Claire said softly. "I know you chose to stay. But Frost, I can't keep you safe the way Dad did. I don't know how. And in a week, maybe less, someone's going to come here and take you away. Or worse." The wolf in the clearing howled, a long, mournful sound that spoke of pack bonds and wild places and freedom from human complications. Frost didn't move. "Go," Claire said, forcing the word out. "Please, for me, for Dad, just go." The white wolf turned away from the window. He limped to the fireplace, lay down on the rug, and closed his eyes. He'd made his decision. Again. Claire stood at the window, watching the wild wolves eventually give up and melt back into the forest, and realized something terrifying. Frost was choosing to stay not out of loyalty to her father's memory, but out of loyalty to her. In less than a week, this ancient wolf had decided she was worth protecting, worth choosing, worth staying for. The responsibility of that choice felt crushing. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Claire was outside chopping firewood, a task that required more effort than she'd anticipated, when she heard the sound of snowmobiles in the distance. Frost, who'd been watching her work from the porch, stood immediately, his body going rigid. "Inside," Claire commanded, surprised by her own authority. Frost hesitated. The snowmobile sounds grew.
Louder. "Now, Frost, please." The wolf obeyed, disappearing into the cabin. Claire barely had time to close the door before two snowmobiles roared into the clearing. Two men dismounted, both wearing ranger uniforms. One was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with a grey beard. The other was younger, maybe 30, with the kind of eager expression that suggested he was new to the job. "Claire Morrison?" the older man called. "That's me." He crossed the clearing with the confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating wilderness. "Tom Mackenzie, we spoke on the phone. This is Ranger Stevens." He gestured to the younger man. "Mind if we come in?" Every instinct screamed at Claire to say, "Yes, actually, I mind very much." But refusing would only raise suspicion. "Of course," she forced a smile. "Coffee?" Inside, Claire's heart hammered as she made coffee on the wood stove, hyper-aware of every sound Frost might make in the loft, where she'd ordered him to hide. Mackenzie and Stevens sat at the small table, looking around the cabin with professional interest. "Your father kept this place in good shape," Mackenzie observed. "Better than most of the remote stations." He took pride in his work. He did. Mackenzie accepted the coffee cup she offered. Robert was one of the best. Knew this territory better than anyone. Spent more time out here than anyone thought was healthy, but he did good work. Stevens was younger, less subtle. His eyes catalogued everything: the bookshelf, the loft ladder, the extra blankets by the fire, the second bowl near the stove. "You planning to stay out here long?" he asked. "I haven't decided yet." "Must be lonely," Stevens continued. "All by yourself. No cell service, no internet, 40 miles from civilization." Claire met his gaze steadily. "I like the quiet." Mackenzie shot Stevens a look that clearly said, "Shut up." "We're not here to pressure you, Miss Morrison. Just wanted to check in, make sure you have everything you need, and to ask a few questions about your father's final days." "I wasn't here when he died," Claire said carefully. "I only arrived last week." "We know. But your father kept detailed logs of his ranger work. We've been going through them, making sure all his territorial observations are recorded properly. There are some irregularities." Claire's stomach tightened. "What kind of irregularities?" Mackenzie pulled out a tablet, scrolling through files. "Your father reported wolf activity in this sector regularly. Alpha male, white coat, approximately 140 pounds. He tracked this animal for years. Multiple sightings, behavioral observations, notes on pack dynamics." He looked up. "The thing is, no other ranger has ever confirmed this white wolf's existence. No photographs, no tracks anyone else verified, nothing. It's like this animal only appeared when your father was watching." The cabin suddenly felt too small, too warm. Claire forced her expression to remain neutral. "Maybe he was the only one who knew where to look." "Maybe," Mackenzie agreed. "Or maybe he was tracking something that didn't want to be found by anyone else." Overhead, a soft thump. Claire's blood froze. Stephen's head snapped up toward the loft. "Mouse problem?" he asked. "Probably," Claire said quickly. "Old cabin, lots of wildlife looking for warm places in winter." Stephen stood. "Mind if I take a look around?" "Actually, I do mind." Claire's voice came out harder than she intended. "This is private property. Unless you have a warrant or some legal reason to search, I'd prefer you didn't go through my father's things." Mackenzie raised a hand, placating. "Easy, Miss Morrison. Stevens is just being thorough. Part of his training." He shot his partner another look. "But she's right. We're guests here. Sit down." Stevens sat, but his suspicion was obvious. Mackenzie returned his attention to Claire. "Your father was protective of this territory, especially the last few years.
He'd get downright hostile if anyone suggested surveying his sector, adding trails, opening it up for guided tours. You have any idea why? Because he was protecting Frost, Claire thought. Out loud, she said, "Dad liked his privacy. You said it yourself, he spent more time out here than was healthy. Maybe he just didn't want people disrupting the wilderness he loved." Maybe. Mackenzie's tone suggested he didn't buy it. Thing is, we've had reports. Hikers claiming they saw a white wolf in this area. One even said it approached their camp, didn't act afraid of humans. That's concerning behavior. Habituated wildlife is dangerous wildlife. "I haven't seen any wolves," Claire lied. "If you do, you call us immediately. Don't approach it. Don't feed it. Don't try to interact with it in any way. Understood?" Understood. Mackenzie stood, Stevens following his lead. "We'll let you get back to it. But Miss Morrison, if you need anything, or if you decide this isolation is too much, you call. We can have someone here in a few hours, weather permitting." "Thank you." At the door, Mackenzie paused. "Your father loved this place, loved the wilderness. But he was also incredibly lonely, especially after your mother died. Don't make his mistake. Don't cut yourself off from the world just because it hurts to be part of it." The words hit harder than Claire expected. She managed a nod. After they left, she waited until the snowmobile sounds faded completely before calling Frost down from the loft. The wolf descended cautiously, his amber eyes alert, checking every corner before approaching her. "They're looking for you," Claire said. "They know you exist, even if they can't prove it. And that ranger, Stevens, he suspects something." Frost sat down in front of her, waiting. "We have maybe 3 days before they come back with more questions. Or worse, with fish and wildlife agents." Claire's hands shook. "I need to figure this out. I need to." Frost stood and walked to her father's desk. He nosed at a drawer, whining softly. "What is it?" The wolf pawed at the drawer insistently. Claire opened it. Inside, beneath a stack of old maps, was a leather folder she'd missed in her previous searches. She pulled it out and found a title written in her father's handwriting. "The Frost Protocol, Emergency Measures." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were detailed instructions, maps, contact information, and a letter addressed to her. "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've met Frost. I'm sorry for leaving you with this burden, but I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my life, besides you. Frost can't stay at the cabin forever. I knew that. I've been buying time, but time always runs out. I've made arrangements. Everything you need is in this folder. There's a sanctuary in the Yukon, private land, no government oversight, run by a woman named Margaret Chen. She's been waiting for my call for 5 years. She knows about Frost. She's agreed to take him when the time comes. The maps will show you the route. It's 300 miles north. The route. It's 300 miles north. You'll need to go on foot part of the way. Areas no vehicle can reach. It'll take 10 days, maybe more. It'll be the hardest thing you've ever done. But Frost is worth it. He's worth everything. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, Claire. But please, be there for him. Give him the ending he deserves, the freedom he earned. With love always, Dad. Claire read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring. Her father had planned for this, had known eventually someone would need to get Frost to safety. He'd just assumed it would be him doing it, not the daughter he'd pushed away. She looked at Frost, who was watching her with patient, knowing eyes. 300 miles, she said, through winter wilderness, with rangers looking for us, and a wolf who can barely walk on his injured paw. Frost's tail wagged once. That's insane. I'm not a wilderness guide. I'm a hospital administrator who hasn't gone camping since I was 12. The wolf waited. Claire looked at the maps, at the careful route her father had planned, at the contact information for Margaret Chen and her sanctuary. Everything was here, every detail accounted for. Robert Morrison had been protecting Frost even after death. The least she could do was finish what he started. Okay, she said, feeling the decision settle in her bones. Okay, we're doing this. Frost stood and pressed his head against her leg. The gesture of trust, of faith, nearly broke her. But if we die out there, I'm haunting you in the afterlife, she added. The wolf's response was to walk to the door and wait, ready for whatever came next. They left before dawn on the 6th day. Claire had spent the previous 48 hours preparing with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She'd studied her father's maps until she could see the route in her sleep, memorized the coordinates of every cache shelter Robert had marked, packed and repacked her gear until every ounce was accounted for. The list of supplies seemed impossible. Food for 10 days, emergency shelter, medical kit, winter camping equipment, extra clothes, water purification tablets, GPS beacon, flares, and enough dog food to sustain a 140-pound wolf through 300 miles of wilderness. The total weight, 65 pounds, more than half her body weight. "This is insane," Claire muttered for the 100th time, adjusting the pack straps. Completely insane. Frost sat by the door, watching her with patient, amber eyes. His injured paw had healed remarkably well over the past week. The antibiotics and
Rest had worked. He still limped slightly, but he could walk, could run if needed. The question was whether he could sustain it for 300 miles. The question was whether either of them could. Claire locked the cabin door, leaving the key under the loose board where her father had always kept it. For a moment, she stood on the porch, looking at the place that had sheltered 3 generations of grief and healing. "Goodbye, Dad," she whispered. Then she turned north and started walking. The first day was harder than anything Claire had imagined. Her father's route avoided roads and trails, cutting through dense forest and across frozen streams where vehicle tracks would be impossible. They moved slowly, Frost setting a pace that accounted for both his healing paw and Claire's inexperience with the massive pack. By noon, every muscle in Claire's body screamed. The pack straps dug into her shoulders despite the padding. Her thighs burned from pushing through knee-deep snow. The temperature hovered around -18, cold enough that her breath froze on her scarf within minutes of exhaling. But Frost never complained, never slowed, never looked back with judgment. He just walked, steady and patient, occasionally pausing to let Claire catch up or to scout ahead for obstacles. They made 12 miles that first day. Claire's GPS showed 288 miles remaining. That night, she set up camp in a grove of spruce trees, using techniques half-remembered from Girl Scout camp decades ago. The tent was small, barely enough room for her and her gear, but it blocked the wind. She built a fire, heated soup from her provisions, and collapsed onto her sleeping bag with a groan. Frost lay outside the tent, positioned between Claire and the dark forest, his white fur making him nearly invisible against the snow. "You can come in," Claire called. "It's warmer." The wolf's ear flicked toward her, but he didn't move. He was on guard duty, protecting her the way he'd protected her father for 20 years. Claire fell asleep to the sound of his steady breathing, and for the first time since her father's death, she didn't have nightmares. Day 2 brought unexpected complications. They'd been walking for 3 hours when Frost stopped abruptly, his body going rigid. Claire froze, following his gaze to the ridge above them. Movement, dark shapes against white snow. "The wild pack?" she whispered. Frost's growl was low, barely audible. Not the pack, something else. Then Claire saw it. A grizzly bear, massive and out of place. Bears should be hibernating in December, but climate change and food scarcity sometimes kept them active longer. And this one looked hungry. The bear stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air. 8 feet tall, easily 600 pounds. Its eyes locked onto them. Claire's hand moved slowly toward the bear spray on her belt. Her father's journal had been clear. Never run from a grizzly. Stand your ground. Make yourself look big. If it charges, spray and pray. The bear dropped to all fours and started moving toward them.
Not quite a charge, but not casual either. Investigating. Frost stepped forward, placing himself between Claire and the approaching bear. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that suddenly looked far too small compared to the bear's claws. "Frost, no," Claire breathed. "You can't." The wolf's howl cut her off. It wasn't the mournful sound she'd heard before. This was aggressive, territorial, a challenge that echoed off the mountains. The bear paused. It was larger, stronger, designed by evolution to dominate. But Frost didn't back down. He howled again, and this time there was an answer. From the forest behind them came 4 more howls. The wild pack had been following them. The bear's head swiveled, calculating. 1 wolf it could kill easily. 5 wolves working together was a different equation. It stood again, sniffed the air 1 more time, then turned and lumbered back up the ridge. Frost's howl faded. The forest fell silent. Claire's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Thank you," she whispered. The wolf looked back at her, then continued walking north, as if nearly dying was just another part of the day. By day 4, they'd fallen into a rhythm. Wake before dawn, break camp, walk until noon, rest for an hour, walk until the light failed, make camp, eat, sleep, repeat. Claire's body adapted with surprising speed. The pack felt lighter, or maybe she'd just gotten stronger. Her stride lengthened, the blisters on her feet hardened into calluses. She learned to read Frost's body language, the tilt of his ears that meant danger, the way his tail moved when he found water, the particular stance that said he'd located one of her father's cache shelters. They didn't talk, obviously, but they communicated. Frost would stop and look back when Claire fell too far behind. Claire would whistle softly when she needed him to wait. At night, Frost had stopped sleeping outside the tent. He curled up beside her now, sharing warmth, and Claire found herself sleeping better with his solid presence against her back. The wilderness revealed itself slowly. Claire saw things she'd never noticed in her brief childhood visits. The way ptarmigans changed color to match the snow, the tracks of lynx and wolverine, the stark beauty of mountains that had existed long before humans and would exist long after. She understood, finally, why her father had chosen this. Not as an escape, but as a return to something essential, something true. On the evening of the 4th day, they reached the first major waypoint, an abandoned ranger station her father had marked on his map. The structure was barely standing, more hole than wall, but it had a functioning fireplace and protection from the wind. Claire collapsed inside, every muscle trembling. 28 miles that day, 55 total, only 245 remaining. She was heating water for freeze-dried pasta when she noticed Frost staring at something in the corner. A box, covered in dust and mouse droppings. Inside, she found 3 items: a bottle of whiskey, a framed photograph, and a letter. The photograph showed 2 people, her father, decades younger, and a woman Claire didn't recognize. Asian, maybe 40, with kind eyes and Robert's same easy smile. They stood in front of this very cabin, arms around each other's shoulders, looking happy in a way Claire had never seen her father look. The letter was addressed, "To whoever brings Frost home." Claire's hands shook as she opened it. "Friend, if you're reading this, Robert is gone, and you've taken on the impossible task of getting Frost to safety. Thank you. That simple word doesn't cover the debt I owe you, but it's all I have. My name is Margaret Chen. Robert and I met 30 years ago when we were both young rangers, both idealistic, both convinced we could save the world, one forest at a time. We were friends, good friends, maybe more than friends if we'd been different people in different circumstances. But Robert met Sarah, and I moved to Canada, and life happened the way it does. We stayed in touch, shared research, traded stories, visited when we could. When Sarah died, Robert called me. He was devastated, broken in ways I couldn't fix from 1,500 miles away. Then he found Frost, and Frost saved him. Robert called me a year later and said, "Mags, I need to know you'll take care of him if something happens to me." I said yes without hesitation. I've been building this sanctuary ever since, preparing for a call I hoped would never come. The fact that you're reading this means that call came, and I wasn't there to answer it. I'm sorry, but you're almost home. Just 250 more miles. Frost knows the way from here. He's made this journey twice before, when Robert brought him to visit, to make sure he'd recognize the sanctuary as safe ground. Keep going. You're doing something extraordinary. With gratitude, Margaret Chen. Claire read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her father had loved someone after her mother died, had maintained a friendship, a connection, even from a distance, had trusted Margaret enough to plan Frost's entire future around her. She looked at Frost, who was watching her with those knowing eyes. "You've been there before," she said. "You know where we're going." The wolf's tail moved. Once. Confirmation. "Then why do you need me? You could make this journey yourself." Frost stood and walked to her. He rested his massive head in her lap, the gesture now familiar, comforting. Because loyalty works both ways, she realized. Frost could have left any time, could have made this journey alone and reached safety days ago. But he'd chosen to stay with her, to match her pace, to protect her through the wilderness. Just like he'd chosen to stay with her father 20 years ago. "Okay," Claire whispered, scratching behind his ears. "We finished this together." Day 6 brought the hardest terrain yet. They'd reached the foothills of the Wrangell Mountains, where her father's route required them to cross a series of ridges too steep for vehicles and too exposed for safety. The temperature had dropped to -28. The wind felt like knives. Claire's GPS showed they'd covered 120 miles. They were almost halfway. But halfway meant nothing if they died on this ridge. The trail, such as it was, wound along a knife edge with 100-foot drops on either side. Snow and ice made every step treacherous. Claire moved slowly, testing each foothold, her breathing labored from the altitude. Frost moved ahead, seeming to float across terrain that should be impossible. Every few minutes he'd look back, checking on her progress. They were 50 yards from the summit when Claire's foot slipped. She fell hard, sliding backward toward the edge. Her pack caught on a rock, stopping her slide with a jolt that knocked the air from her lungs. For 3 seconds, she hung there, half her body over empty air, knowing that if the pack tore free, she would fall. Then, Frost was there. The wolf grabbed her pack strap in his jaws and pulled. His paws scraped against ice, trying to find purchase. His muscles strained with effort that should have been impossible for an animal his age. Claire clawed at the ground, trying to help, trying to give him anything to work with. Slowly, inch by inch, Frost dragged her back from the edge. When she was finally on solid ground, Claire lay gasping, her entire body shaking. Frost stood over her, panting hard, checking her for injuries with his nose. "I'm okay," she managed. "I'm okay, thank you." The wolf's response was to lie down beside her, sharing his warmth while she recovered. They stayed there for 20 minutes, woman and wolf, on a mountain ridge in the middle of nowhere, neither willing to move until both were ready. When they finally continued, Claire's hand stayed close to Frost's fur, drawing strength from his presence. By day 8, they'd covered 220 miles. Claire's body had transformed. Muscles she'd forgotten existed were now hard and defined. Her face was wind-burned, her hands cracked and bleeding despite the gloves. She'd lost at least 10 pounds, weight she couldn't afford to lose. But she was stronger than she'd ever been. Could hike 20 miles without stopping, could set up camp in 15 minutes, could read the weather by the color of the sky and the behavior of birds. Frost's limp had nearly disappeared. The wilderness had healed him as much as Claire's antibiotics. He moved with the confidence of youth, despite his 20 years. They were going to make it. Claire could feel it. That night, camped in a valley her father's map marked as the Gateway, Claire found herself talking to Frost the way she imagined her father had. "I was so angry at him," she said, stirring freeze-dried stew over the camp stove. "For 15 years, I was furious. Thought he'd abandoned me because I wasn't enough. because he loved this wilderness more than he loved me. Frost's ear flicked toward her, listening. But he didn't leave because of me. He left because he was drowning and didn't want to pull me under with him. Claire's voice cracked. And then he found you. And you saved him. Gave him a reason to keep going when he'd lost everything else. The wolf moved closer, resting his head on her knee. "I'm glad he had you," Claire whispered. "I'm glad he wasn't alone." They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, both mourning the man who'd connected them. Day 9 started with fresh snow. Not a storm, just steady flakes that covered their tracks within minutes. By noon, they'd added 4 inches to the already deep pack. By evening, the GPS showed they'd managed only 8 miles. But according to her father's map, they were less than 25 miles from the sanctuary. One more day, maybe 2 if the weather worsened. Claire's supplies were running low. She'd rationed carefully, but 2 extra days on the trail had depleted her food stores. She had enough for tomorrow, maybe the next day if she skipped meals. After that, they'd be traveling on empty. Frost seemed to sense the urgency. He pushed the pace the next morning, moving faster than they'd managed since the journey began. Claire struggled to keep up, her empty stomach making her dizzy, but she refused to be the reason they failed this close to the end. By 2 p.m. on day 10, they crested a ridge, and Claire saw it. A valley, wider than the others, with a river cutting through its center. Smoke rising from a cluster of buildings. Solar panels glinting on roofs. Large enclosures, carefully constructed, blending into the landscape. The sanctuary. "We made it," Claire breathed. "Frost, we actually made it." The wolf stood beside her, looking down at his future home, and for the first time since she'd met him, Frost's tail wagged with genuine joy. They descended into the valley as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. A woman emerged from the largest building, tall and silver-haired, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Margaret Chen. She stopped when she saw them, one hand rising to her mouth. "Robert's daughter," she called out, "and Frost." Claire's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees in the snow, exhausted beyond measure. Frost moved to stand beside her, supporting her weight. Margaret approached slowly, respectfully, giving Frost time to remember her. The wolf's tail moved tentatively, then with more enthusiasm. He remembered. "Hello, old friend," Margaret said softly, kneeling in the snow. "Robert told me you'd come. I just didn't think it would be like this." Frost moved to her, allowing her to touch his face, his ears. The reunion was gentle, bittersweet. Then Margaret looked at Claire. "You brought him through 300 miles of winter wilderness. Robert said you would, but I didn't believe him." "He said I would?" Claire's voice was hoarse from disuse. "In his will, he left me a letter, said you were stronger than you knew, that when it mattered, you'd choose loyalty over safety. He was right." Claire didn't have words, she just nodded. Margaret helped her to her feet. "Come inside, both of you. You're home." The sanctuary was everything Robert's letters had promised. 15 acres of protected wilderness, with heated shelters, veterinary facilities, and enclosures designed to give rescued wolves room to roam while keeping them safe from hunters and authorities. Margaret had 4 other wolves currently in residence, each with their own story of rescue and rehabilitation. That first night, Claire slept in a real bed for the first time in 10 days. She woke 12 hours later to find Frost curled up beside her bed, still on guard duty even here. Over the next 3 days, Margaret introduced Frost to the sanctuary gradually. The other wolves were kept separate at first, giving him time to adjust. Claire watched as the old wolf explored his new home, checking every corner, testing every fence, ensuring it was truly safe. On the 4th day, Margaret opened the gate to the main enclosure. 3 wolves waited inside. 2 grey males, young and energetic, and a female, white as frost, with amber eyes that locked onto him immediately. "This is Luna," Margaret said quietly. She came to us 6 months ago, rescued from a breeding facility that was shut down. She's 5 years old. Never knew a day of
freedom before she came here. Claire watched as Frost approached Luna slowly. The female wolf stood her ground, watching him with cautious interest. They circled each other, learning scents, testing boundaries. Then Luna's tail wagged, just once. Frost's response was to bow, a play gesture Claire had read about but never seen. Luna responded in kind, and suddenly they were running together, two white wolves chasing each other through the snow like pups. Claire's eyes burned. "He's happy." "He's home," Margaret corrected. "There's a difference." That night, Claire stood at the fence, watching Frost play with his new pack. The old wolf was transformed, moving with energy she hadn't seen during their journey. He'd found his place, his people, his purpose. It was time to let go. "I have to leave tomorrow," Claire said. Margaret stood beside her, both women watching the wolves in the moonlight. "You could stay," Margaret offered. "I could use help, and Frost would love having you here." The temptation was overwhelming, but Claire knew the truth. Staying here would be choosing isolation again, choosing to hide from the world the way her father had. "I need to go back," Claire said. "I have a life in Anchorage, a job, an apartment, friends I've been neglecting. Will you visit?" "As often as I can." Claire smiled. "Someone needs to make sure you're taking proper care of the old man." They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Margaret spoke. "Robert loved you very much. He talked about you constantly, especially toward the end. His biggest regret was losing those 15 years with you." "Mine too," Claire whispered. "But you're here now. You honored his last request. You brought Frost home. That's what matters." Claire nodded, unable to speak. The next morning, she packed her few belongings and prepared to leave. Frost watched from inside his enclosure, Luna standing beside him. Claire approached the fence one last time. "Hey, old man." Frost's tail wagged. "Thank you for choosing Dad, for giving him 20 years of companionship when he needed it most. And thank you for choosing me, even though I didn't deserve it." The wolf pressed his nose against the fence. Claire touched it with her fingers, feeling his warmth one last time. "Be happy, Frost. Be free. Be everything you were meant to be." She turned to walk away before she could change her mind. Behind her, Frost howled. Not sad, not mournful, joyful. A sound of completion, of journey's end, of home found. Claire didn't look back. She climbed into Margaret's truck, and they drove down the mountain toward civilization, toward life, toward a future that finally felt possible. Epilogue. 6 months later, June 2025. Claire Morrison stood on the porch of her father's cabin, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. She'd quit her job in Anchorage 3 months ago, used her inheritance to turn the cabin into a year-round residence, installed proper insulation, a generator, satellite internet. The place was still isolated, still 40 miles from the nearest neighbor, but it was home now. Her home. She worked remotely for Margaret's Sanctuary, managing their grants and fundraising. Visited twice a month, making the journey in her new 4-wheel drive instead of on foot. Watched Frost thrive with his pack, with Luna, with the freedom her father had worked so hard to give him. But today was special. Claire's phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "They're here. Come now." She grabbed her keys and drove faster than was wise on the unpaved roads, arriving at the sanctuary just as the sun reached its zenith. Margaret met her at the gate, grinning. "You're going to want to see this." In the main enclosure, Frost lay in a patch of sunlight. Luna rested beside him, looking tired but content, and between them, 4 tiny wolf pups, white as fresh snow, tumbling over each other with clumsy enthusiasm. Claire's breath caught. Frost is a father? At 20 years old, no less, Margaret laughed. The old man still had it in him. Luna gave birth last night. 4 healthy pups, 2 males, 2 females.
Claire watched Frost with his children. The ancient wolf looked at peace in a way she'd never seen. His legacy would continue. His bloodline would carry forward into a future of protection and safety. "Can I name one?" Claire asked. "I think Robert would have wanted that." Claire thought for only a moment. "The smallest one, the one with his eyes. I want to call him Robert, after my father." Margaret squeezed her hand. Perfect. They stood at the fence, watching the miracle of new life, the continuation of a story that began with an abandoned pup and a broken man who chose to save him. Frost looked up and met Claire's eyes across the distance. His tail wagged once, slow and deliberate. "Thank you," the gesture seemed to say, "for finishing what he started, for bringing me home." Claire smiled, tears streaming down her face. "No, Frost, thank you for everything." The white wolf returned his attention to his pups, to Luna, to the life he'd earned. Above them, the Alaska sun shone bright, and the future stretched endless and full of possibility. Two broken souls had found each other in the snow 20 years ago. They'd saved each other, healed each other, given each other purpose. And now, through Claire's journey, through Frost's loyalty, through Margaret's dedication, that legacy would live on. Some bonds transcend species. Some love transcends loss. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is simply choosing to stay, to fight, to carry on, even when the world says it's impossible. In the end, that's what family means. Not blood, not proximity, but choice. And Frost had chosen, again and again and again.